Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Welcome to our Fast Forward webinar series, sponsored by the Infinity Workforce Solutions. Very much appreciate you all taking some of your time to join us today. We've got a really, I think, very important topic. I know I've had conversations with a lot of companies over time about the DataQ system. Obviously, you all know that it's there to help you challenge information that FMC is holding that you may think is incomplete or incorrect. But I will have to say a lot of folks have had great luck with it. Some have not had good luck with it, and others have not even tried to use it. So once again, I think we got a great program and a great presenter today. What I would like you to do, if you don't mind, is just jump on that chat box down there at the bottom. Let us know who you are and who you're with, maybe where you're from, so we can get to know you a little bit. And while you're doing that, I wanted to say a couple of things about Vertical Alliance Group and the Infinity Workforce Solutions. You know, as a company, we're really dedicated to empowering and streamlining safety programs for transportation companies, both for hire and private, across the United States. With about 850 training videos and a customizable learning management system that you can automate, track, and literally document all aspects of training, it's really no wonder why we have nearly 2,000 companies that have chosen the Infinity Workforce Solutions. So, the system not only makes it easy to build an affordable, best-in-class training program for your drivers, but I think even as important, it frees up your administrative time while still giving you the ability to communicate more effectively and train your employees anywhere, anytime. So if you're really committed to have a training program that proves you value your safety over just about everything else, check us out at infinityworkforce.com. You can see that link there in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. So now I would like to introduce you to our guest today that's going to kind of give us some good information about the DataQ system. I want you all to welcome Richard Goins. Richard is really an industry veteran. Gosh, I've met you a couple of times, Richard. Richard has over 30 years experience as a driver, a fleet manager, a trainer. And then he kind of went on the other side and spent, about 15 years, I believe, with the Oregon Department of Transportation as an investigator and as an adjudicator of DataQs. Richard has conducted over 5,000 CVSA truck inspections and has coached dozens, if not hundreds, of new inspectors and law enforcement agencies from all over the state of Oregon. And I guess today, Richard, you help a lot of your own companies in your position there with TLC Companies to help them and advise them on regulatory compliance and safety issues. And I'm sure you help them quite a bit with DataQ also. So having said all that, Richard, welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's good to be here. Actually, I was with the Oregon Department of Transportation for 10 years, but
I overestimated you a little bit. Sorry about that.
It's all right. I just like to be honest.
Fair enough.
So DataQs are, that was one of the last things that I ended up doing with the state of Oregon, and adjudicating a DataQ or being an analyst who chooses determines whether or not a violation should be removed or retained. It's kind of you're on kind of a blank slate. What the feds offer is a very simple set of guidelines for how violations should be kept or removed. There is no certification process for doing that like there is with becoming a truck inspector or getting your hazardous materials. They figure by the time you've done that, been in it long enough, they're not going to have you get set up for certification. The most important thing when you're getting ready to conduct a DataQ is looking at a truck inspection for what it really is. And it isn't like a ticket where an officer witnesses something, pulls you over, and writes a citation with a monetary penalty. What an inspection is really, if you go to the next slide, it's a window in time where the condition of the truck driver are documented to create the correct view of the carrier safety protocols. So basically what a good inspector should be doing is not choosing necessarily which violations to write, but just documenting what they're finding on the truck at the time that they had it stopped. So that means the day of the stop. So if they're looking at the log, they're looking at that day, the previous 7, and they're looking at the driver's condition, whether they're compliant with medical, with whether or not their CDL is current, things like that. Next slide. I'll go over this kind of quick just because of the fact that I think the most valuable thing is answering questions. So the purpose of the system in a DataQ is to provide industry partners the opportunity to dispute whether or not a violation was written within policy. So if a truck inspection is written and you have a violation written outside of policy 14 or policy 15, those operational policies determine how and when violations should be cited. So it's really important for inspectors to follow those operational policies. One of the other things that is proposed for this system, one of the reasons is, inspectors like me will make mistakes. I've cited the wrong carrier, I've cited the wrong driver, and there are ways that this can happen with the electronic system. And sometimes truck inspectors are going through and they're looking at various violations, and they'll simply click down the next wrong one. Other things that will happen that will warrant a DataQ will be if a carrier qualified for an exception or an exemption. So we had, during COVID, we had the COVID exemptions so that we could get certain types of commodities through in a timely manner. And not all inspectors who do inspections are up to date constantly because there's a lot going on. Oftentimes when law enforcement is working in this industry, truck inspections are a very small part of what they do. So sometimes they'll miss a new exemption that is an emergency exemption for whether it's something like COVID or it's something to do with snowstorms. For instance, you'll see winter exceptions for carriers who are operating, hauling propane, and they have got to get them through. So they'll do a 395 exception for hours of service. Slide. Oh, sorry about that. So some of the things that questions that I answer a lot are carriers will want to challenge every single violation. And I strongly suggest not to do that. There's a lot of reasons. When you submit a DataQ, the person that you're talking to was likely an inspector at one time. In fact, they really should have been, and they should have done a lot of inspections. And every request for a review and inspection, right or wrong, creates an impression of the carrier with that agency. So if you dispute every single violation that's written, that some of them clearly had to be there, you're going to start off with a really bad impression for the individual who's conducting the DataQ. And carriers want to be seen as partners with the FMCSA, and not, it's important for both sides that we approach everything from a partner point of view. Time spent challenging valid violations isn't being spent correctly, in my opinion. If you know that you had a violation, when I've run trucking companies and fleets, it was really important to me to spend my time correcting errors that I've had. And we have some errors. I've had quite a few over the years, and that's a better choice or better priority for the time. Repeated attempts are not necessarily a good idea. Generally, the policy allows for a single attempt, and then there's some new policies coming out now where they'll allow two, and then it will move on to a independent system if the new policy comes up. Slide. It's really important to remember who the audience is. So when you're presenting your facts, and that's really all you want to present is facts, for a request or review, the individual is probably going to be a long-term officer. They've conducted thousands of truck inspections. They've got dozens of officers that they manage. And that in person is going to be really interested in whether or not policy was followed, whether or not the inspection was written properly. Sometimes inspectors will write an inspection in such a way that it just doesn't make any sense. They'll use the canned verbiage within the system, and then the notes that they make are separate. If that canned verbiage and the notes they make don't blend, what I strongly suggest is you should provide them facts, photos, especially if it's wrong driver, wrong carrier, something to that effect. But this person's going to be a really fact-oriented individual. Slide. And this kind of covers the same ground. Reviewing officials will be concerned with things like, did the violation exist at the time of the inspection? Was the violation written within guidelines? Did the inspector correctly interpret the regulation? This is one where you're writing your DataQ where you want to go ahead and copy and paste the regulation and then go back into the regulations, find the interpretation, and look and see if there's a question within the interpretation that supports your point of view. And oftentimes there will be. There's a lot of data within the FMCSA system that you'll be able to find, whether they're questions and answers or they're fact sheets, and you use the fact sheets right out of the DataQ system. It's really hard for an adjudicator to look at that and say, no, you got to keep it. Facts that I wouldn't consider, and the feds cover this in their new policy review that they're doing of this, is requesting leniency. It was the driver's first offense. Being that what they're trying to do is document the condition, it won't matter whether it seemed fair or it was a driver's first offense, or if it was a minor violation. Violations carry different points for a reason. So, and some of them carry none at all. If you go in to look at your truck inspections on your SMS profile, you'll see that some very clearly say not included in SMS. And when you see something like that, you don't want to waste your time trying to remove the violation because it doesn't really carry any weight. One of the other things is if a carrier's having a lot of trouble and they're really hoping to get a violation removed for that reason, I can guarantee nobody's going to remove a violation for that reason. That would be in direct contravention of federal policy. If you're having a really hard time and you find that, this violation is the one that you think is going to put you over the top, find any other reason, then you're having a hard time because it's not going to really change what's happening. It's unfortunate, but the system isn't fair. It just simply is. So next slide. This is really important. Violations, citations, and warnings. So a violation can only be written on a CVSA truck inspection. It won't be added to a ticket or a citation that an officer gives you. unless the two are written in conjunction with one another. So you can have a violation and no citation. You can have a citation and no violation. For instance, officers that are not trained FMCSA personnel who are certified to do truck inspections can't create a truck inspection. They can't write a violation. They can only cite the driver and the carrier with some type of monetary penalty. Violations written on inspections, they don't carry any weight on a driver's DMV record. They only carry weight as far as the CSA is concerned. Violations are put on a company's record for 2 years and on a driver's record for 3 years. Crash information is carried out for 5. Citations are often subject to a state agency, the DMV, for instance. They can be written, like I said, in addition to a violation. And any non-certified sworn officer can write them, and they're not adjudicated through the DataQ system. The important thing to remember about this is if the driver was cited with a violation, also received a citation, before you begin the DataQ process, what you're going to want to do is fight the ticket in court. And that carries the most weight. So if a judge removes the citation, dismisses it, lowers it, I can almost guarantee that at some level, something is going to change depending on the policy and the type of violation with the DataQ. So they will remove or alter the information within the system. What's supposed to say there on that is warning, not subtitle. I don't know where that came from. Warnings are totally separate from both of these types of citations or recordings. When a warning is written, you'll sometimes see, unfortunately, you'll see that a violation was put on the truck inspection, and then in the center where there's citation, they'll say warning. Sometimes officers are under the incorrect impression that a violation and a warning are the same thing, and they're not. The violation carries weight with this CSA. A warning is often used, sometimes in my opinion, just to demonstrate that the officer had PC for the stop. So if they just write a warning, you really don't want them to put that on the inspection, or you don't want them to do an inspection and put the cite for the warning on there too. But warnings don't carry through to the CVSA or the FMCSA, and they don't affect a driver's driving record. When you're looking at these different enforcement tools, you want to really watch carefully before you start, because it is really important. Start with the court if you have a citation, and that will give you weight with the FMCSA partner when you go to do the DataQ. I wouldn't ever mess with a warning because they carry no weight. Oftentimes they're not recorded for long periods of time, and they're just used if a record is made of the warning, it'll be used to determine whether or not the next time a driver is stopped, if there's going to be enforcement action. Slide. So really, we're at a point where I want to do the most beneficial thing for everybody. And covering all this material is unimportant if we're not answering questions. And there's several resources that are here, but the most important thing is that we take very specific situations and we attack those. DataQs are something that take up a lot of time within a state agency, and they're taken very seriously, but there is not a uniform system right now in place, and they're getting ready to change that. As a matter of fact, it's great that we're doing this because we really need public comment on this to get the FMCSA to move on it and make a more uniform system. But I've covered the information that I have at the front. Steve, do you have any questions what I've brought?
Yeah, actually, we have some, and thanks for that information, Richard. one of the questions that came in, you mentioned it briefly, if a citation was dismissed, can we data queue it and how will it affect the company's record?
So if a citation's dismissed, with the vast majority of citations, the violation should be removed from the inspection, and it will remove those points from their CSA. So what you'll see is you might still see the violation in your SMS profile, but the points, when you look at you click on the hyperlink for that inspection with your near SMS profile, and you'll see on one of the columns, it'll say not included in SMS. And that's how you know whether or not there were points associated with it. So if it's still on there and it says not included in SMS, it's in some way they've removed it.
Okay, great. Another question, from time to time, in roadside inspection, for example, there's some issue with the equipment that's written up. Is it allowed or is it important for a driver to actually take a picture of that as some record of what the problem was with the equipment? Is that allowed, Richard?
It's absolutely allowed. I strongly recommend that drivers always take a picture of what the officer's talking about. There are some times when there's a mechanical issue, and within the Aspen system that the feds have created to do electronic truck inspections, there are some canned references to air leak under truck. And they've got that canned that way because we know it wasn't one of the valves, but we can't find where it is. So obviously you can't take a picture of that, but a video and you can hear it can help. And especially if you believe it's coming from one of the valves between the brakes or something like that, it's really good idea to have that little bit of video from your phone.
Right, that's good to know. Would you suggest, from your background, Richard, that this kind of information would be something that you should train your drivers a little bit on how to behave and act and participate in an inspection?
Every driver that I currently work with, I provide this information to. I do my best to train them on how to handle a truck inspection, how to engage with the officer. If you feel like you need to dispute the violation, I train all the drivers that I work with that if you feel like the inspection is being written in error, I would always approach the inspector with the questions, could you explain this to me? I don't think I'm understanding it. And if you have the electronic CFR and you can point out what the exact regulation states and just say to the officer, hey, this is what this says. Could you explain to me how this applies here? I as an inspector, as long as the driver is being respectful and cooperative, I've never had any problem with that. As a matter of fact, I've learned a lot more from the errors that I made in inspections than all of the correct things that I did.
Makes sense. Here's kind of a specific question. Leo's asked, I have 2 seatbelt warnings that are showing on our SMS record. Both are a severity weight of 7. Can you kind of talk about what kind of circumstance we have here?
So what happened is the officer probably felt like he was doing the driver a favor by not issuing a citation with a monetary penalty too. So they'll put that warning there under citation, and it's going to show up in the inspection. Because it's in the inspection, it's going to carry those points. If you go to that in your SMS profile to where that inspection is and double click on that hyperlink for that inspection, you're going to see a column there under that inspection that says included in SMS. And if it says yes, you know those points are there for it. I can almost guarantee you those points are going to be attributed to your SMS profile.
Very good. Another question, this comes from Leslie. Leslie's asking, crash data stays in the system for 5 years. Do the points associated with the crash remain for 5 years?
kind of a gray spot. I don't think I totally comprehend, I'm just going to be honest here, how those points are adjudicated. So I've done hundreds of compliance reviews, what we in the side of the industry call a DOT audit. And within the, what is it called? The methodology, I have never reviewed the crash data. When you do a compliance review and you enter it into the current system, it used to be Capri and now it's AIM. You go into that and you enter the crashes that are in the company's profile, and it automatically adjudicates some level of, and I don't want to say fault, but it does affect the carrier's rating. I've never seen the exact points associated with a crash because crashes are not listed in the system based on whether or not it's a carrier's fault. You know, you've probably heard the FMCSA, somebody within the administration say, carriers who have crashes have crashes. So what they're getting at is that the more crashes a carrier has, the more likely they are to have them. It doesn't really carry points, but in a compliance review, it's going to affect your review for sure. It will affect what they call rating. I don't know if that really answers your question.
Well, you know, it sounds like there's, like you said, a little gray area there. So perhaps that can be researched some more and find out if there's any more definitive information. I got another question. Go ahead, Richard. I'm sorry.
When you go into the crash preventability program that they have and you apply to have a crash removed, if it wasn't a carrier's fault, they will never remove that crash because it's just that there was a crash.
Right. So
I don't believe that they carry points like a flat tire.
Gotcha. Okay, another question here. This comes from Tim. Tim says, what is a reasonable amount of time to expect an inspection violation or accident preventability ruling to be reviewed once submitted by the carrier? And is there anything we can do if an agency takes longer than normal to review?
So all crash preventability data challenges are conducted by the FMCSA. They don't have their state partners participate in that. And there's way fewer people within the FMCSA than there are with regard to their partners. So you can often see a crash take as much as 90 days to review. And I've seen them reviewed within 30, but they are going to take the longest. I don't think that a DataQ for a hours of service violation should take more than a week.
Okay.
But what happens with that is the individuals responsible for it will receive an email that there's a RDR in their queue, and they have, I think I had 4 days to respond, but that was always that had to do with state policy. And that's one of the things that they're looking at, is because there isn't really any uniformity.
Okay. And do you think, is there anything that the carrier or the agency can do if it's just taken too long? Or you think it's taken too long? Is there a follow-up?
I have something right here that because I was thinking I might hear this question. Apologize. I've got a lot of things open here in hopes that I could help people with this. It's not there. So the best thing that I can tell you to do is resubmit it. Okay. And I know there's something in there. I haven't done a DataQ for somebody for a while. I don't have a DOT number right now, so I obviously I'm not doing them. I help other people with theirs, but it'll say, if you haven't heard back, don't resubmit. I don't know if that's still in there, but if you don't get any type of review whatsoever, you might try resubmitting it.
Submit it.
One thing you can do, and the FMCSA doesn't like this, and I'm probably going to get chewed out for this, but, and I don't work for them, but I would call the state administrator's office. Within some federal agencies, what you see is, unfortunately, you don't get any response till your third email. It's kind of the joke around. It's not a joke. It does happen. But I would go ahead and call the state administrator's office. If you're in a state, like, for instance, the state of Missouri, their state police handle it. Calling the headquarters is totally okay. It's probably the best thing that you can do. If you're in the state of Oregon, or the state of Oregon has the DataQ system, it's not run by the state police, you'd call the Oregon Department of Transportation, their Commerce and Compliance Division. But you can look these things up, and it's totally okay to call because it should not be taking weeks and weeks to get a response.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions here, Richard, so hang on. Here's kind of a general question. You may have these numbers in your head. Are there any statistics or numbers on the number of disputes and percentage of disputes approved? Any numbers on how many pass and how many fail?
I have never seen anything that provided a percentage. What I can tell you is that when I was conducting DataQs, I would review the inspection. I would immediately contact the officer. In some states, the officer will have a canned area where all their notes per inspection are. I won't have to contact them. I can immediately go to where that server is and look up the officer's notes if he's got any photographs, and that way I don't have to go through the time of waiting for them to get back from work or from vacation or whatever it is. I can just review the notes and then review the request. If the request submitted deals with exemptions, exceptions, and the carrier has demonstrated that they were, I don't want to use the word deserve, but if the exemption or exception applied to them, I would automatically just change it. I'd say when I was doing it, about 10% got altered. Now, sometimes that means the correct violation was put in. I don't really like that practice, but that's what happens if the inspector just wrote the wrong violation. If I see that an exemption or exception applied to them, immediately remove it. But I'd say about 10%. But we have a lot of people out doing, conducting DataQs. Some are doing it as a business, and I don't have a problem with that. And they're charging carriers per DataQ, so they want to do them. So they'll DataQ things that there's absolutely no reason to challenge it. And so, you might open up your queue and find 7 in the morning, and all of them were from Joe's DataQ service.
Gotcha.
So it kind of throws off the averages, I would say.
Yeah, I can see that. Another question, this comes from Michael. Is there a time limit to when a DataQ must be filed?
No. If it is in the system, if it's still, if you're a carrier and it's on your SMS profile, you can challenge it. If you're a driver and your carrier, the company that you work for has not locked their system, then you can do it up to 3 years because it's on the driver's PSP for 3 years.
All right. Here's somebody commenting. There was a question earlier about the crashes in 5 years. And Tommy's saying that the FMCSA told him that the points come off the company 2 years from the date of the accident, even if the crash did not post to the portal until months after the accident. So that's from Tommy. That's what he was told by FMCSA.
Well, I know when you're doing a compliance review, and you go into that system, how it affects the rating. There are crashes that have been in there for 5 years that are not affecting a carrier's rating. So that sounds accurate to me.
Okay, great. That's good. We got a little clarity there. Here's another question. It says, we were charged with an accident in which our driver or vehicle was not involved. There was clear video evidence that was provided, but never received a clear answer as to why we were charged.
So if it is still in the carrier's SMS profile, I would submit it immediately. If you weren't there, this is something that's really common within this. It's one of the common errors within the system, is that the wrong carrier is cited. And there's a lot of reasons. I won't, it's a deep can of worms there. There's a lot of reasons that happens. And it's not incompetence, it's more like fat-fingered keyboard. But it's always a good idea to get a hold of the state agency that was involved in the crash investigation, if there was a crash investigation. Whoever the crash was reported to, contact them, document the contact that you had with them, and go back to the crash preventability program and apply under "it wasn't us," basically.
Okay, let's see. We got several more questions popping in here. Why are there such limited options when trying to submit a DataQ about an accident?
Well, I'd say the crash preventability people who developed that program were hesitant about doing it in the first place. So what they did is they set up crashes that they believe are not preventable whatsoever, and just used those crashes. And it's important when you're looking at the crashes to not think about it as them faulting the carrier for the crash. What they're doing is they're documenting that the carrier was involved in a crash. It's not like a ticket. It is simply that they're documenting what that carrier did in that 5-year period. And oftentimes it's definitely not the carrier's fault. But that's how the Part 385 of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations issues points, is if one carrier has 100 crashes in a 5-year period and another carrier has 10, obviously there's something going on there. Now, they're not writing citations, there's no monetary fines. If a compliance review is done, there is not a site within the review to penalize a company for the crash. It's simply a measure of what's happening within the company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Absolutely. Wow, there are lots of questions coming in. I'm
here.
Whoops. So here's another question. This comes from Scott. It says, New York is known for giving seatbelt violations when they are being worn. How do you recommend that we DataQ a he said, she said violation like this? I
don't. If they put a warning, if they issued the driver a warning and cited it on the inspection, then they just chose to do an inspection at the same time and documented the condition of the driver at the time of the stop. So what they're doing there is they're choosing not to give the driver a monetary penalty. And there's nothing within the DataQ system that would allow for challenging a seatbelt violation when the driver also received a warning.
Okay.
Generally, I don't like it when they give warnings and violations because they're really not connected. It really shouldn't, in my opinion, be part of the inspection process because it creates this confusing situation.
Okay. Lena is asking how to DataQ the out of service for maintenance. If the driver was staying on the shoulder waiting for the road service to come, when DLT officers were called by the local police and gave him a lot of hours of service violations for this. That's question's a little confusing. Just if you could talk in general about DataQ for hours of service.
So a driver can't be in violation of the hours of service unless they were operating in excess of them. So if before the driver stopped, they were already in excess, the driver committed the violation and it was an out of service violation. I'd be happy to look at the inspection and tell you what I think, but you wouldn't want to DataQ anything where you know the violation occurred when an inspection took place and whether or not a vehicle was broke down doesn't really have anything to do with the truck inspection.
Okay. Next question. This comes from Bruce. Upon submitting a DataQ challenge, are they not supposed to give it to a different officer? I had one in Missouri that they gave it back to the same officer twice. It was on an ABS light on the trailer that was being pulled by a non-ABS truck manufactured before 1997. Officer maintained the trailer light was supposed to work, period, and refused to look at the year model of the tractor.
Well, what I'm curious about is if they actually, and I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I'm wondering if it actually was given to that inspector to dispute, or they questioned that inspector twice and just included their email response. Generally speaking, if a DataQ is conducted and no changes made, and you submit the request again for somebody else to look at it, either that individual who looked at it will look at it again and collaborate with another inspector or analyst, or they will give it to another analyst. But sometimes it might look like they gave it to the same person and it was just the officer who conducted the inspection who is responding in email to the analyst's question. So that can be confusing. If it's going to the same person, I don't like that. I don't think that's a good thing. It's one of the things that they're reviewing right now. And if you have something like that, I strongly suggest that you get into the system. They're accepting public comments, bring this kind of thing up. This is important because the DataQ system is flawed, very. But it hasn't been around for a really long time. So there's going to be things wrong with it, but I strongly suggest that you get in and make a comment on it. You can contact Missouri State Patrol and ask to talk to a captain, and I'm certain that they would be happy to talk to you about it and present it to them. But I don't think that, I don't know if, I think that that's 1 point. And if you don't deserve it, you don't deserve it. But it is, sometimes you want to weigh the effort versus reward.
That makes sense. Alan's asking, if a driver receives a violation and then quits, can the violation be DataQ?
Nope.
Simple answer to that one.
Well, the thing is that if the driver did something wrong, and it was documented at the time, that is the condition of that truck and that driver at that time.
Right.
So whether you terminate the driver for it, or you fine them for it, or whatever you do to the driver, it doesn't change that moment in time.
So you could, if it's on the motor carrier's record, then it could be DataQ, yes?
No, it still belongs to the motor carrier because the driver was working for the motor carrier at that time.
Oh, you're saying the driver couldn't DataQ it?
Well, I'm saying nobody could. Well, you could. I don't believe it would get anywhere.
Okay. All right. Here's another question. Do state laws come before FMC regulations at certain states? I received an answer from the officer from Pennsylvania that annual periodic inspection decals are not valid, and Pennsylvania state inspection decal is required. The driver had forms, but decals were washed off. Do state laws come before FMCSA regulations in certain states?
So what the regulations basically say on some things is that once a state adopts the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, whether they choose not to adopt one portion or not, they can write the violation under Part 392 local laws. So if it was written under that, it probably could not be written under the 396.17 violation because that very well specifies annual. But for instance, California, I believe there's this quarterly. I just recently found this out with Pennsylvania, and I was trying to help out a carrier with it, and I couldn't get any response from Pennsylvania at all. But I do know that they can make laws that go above and beyond. And what you want to do is when you look at the truck inspection under the site, it'll either say for this particular violation, it'll either say 396.17, and that will be the annual inspection, or periodic is what the regulations state, but it is an annual. Or it'll say 392 local laws, and it'll give 392.771 or whatever it is, and it will cite the state regulation. So it does, what they're doing is they're adding a violation that doesn't occur within the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations.
Okay. I need to make a quick announcement here, folks. We have a lot of questions here, and we generally try to keep our program in under an hour. So I'm going to keep going until we reach right at 3 o'clock, and then we have record of all of your questions here, and we'll try to sort those out and get them to the right people to get some of your questions answered. But I knew we'd have a lot of questions here, but we have I'm still looking at 25 or 6 of them here that I haven't even asked. So we're going to do the best we can to get through as many of these as we can. Here's a question from Christian. Considering the ongoing, or at least a start of reform, what changes do you foresee to be done to the DataQ system? That's a good question.
Well, I just made my public comment this morning on it, and I had read what the proposed rule was, and I suggested that they have a independent board conduct this rather than the individual states, and that's very much what they're looking at doing for DataQs that have been denied the first 2 times. And that's the biggest change that I think is going to happen. I applaud it. I really hope they don't back off on it, because I won't say which states, but I know some states the DataQ goes to the inspector who conducted the inspection. And I believe that some inspectors' sunglasses have the mirrors on the inside. So
okay.
I'm hoping they do that independent review board.
So it's important to make your voice heard and make some comments. Otherwise, we have to help change this. If there are problems with it, it's going to be up to us in the industry to do something about it.
I plead with everybody listening to this to make a public comment.
Yeah, we can't expect change if they don't hear from you and know what your problems are. Eric's asking, is 4 months waiting on a determination for a crash preventability to make a decision a common time period?
I'm sorry to say, I think it is. I think they're that far behind. It's not good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's not out of the realm of possibility. It's the longest I've ever heard. But I've heard 98 days.
Wow. Okay, let's see. We got another question here. It says, when challenging crash data, what is best practice to present the crash to be considered non-preventable? I recently had a crash which is in this category due to a deer strike.
Well, if you have, well, I think it should just be it should just be considered non-preventable. But if you have evidence of the deer strike, whether you have photos, if you have an accident report, if there was an officer on scene and they stated anything, I would simply just include the evidence, choose that scenario when you're conducting the DataQ on the crash and submit all of that evidence. It's going to take a little while, but I can't imagine them not removing any deer strike.
Yeah, here's somebody, Holly responded, says, I've submitted a request showing hair in the grill. So I guess that would be the hair from the deer.
I would, I've never done them with crash because I worked for a state agency.
Right.
But if I were doing that, I would consider that better evidence than just hearsay.
All right. Another question from Michael says, when you request a DataQ, you get your response. You are told that CVSA needs to change the rule because the officer is following their guidelines. You contact CVSA and they tell you they can't get FMCSA review this, but they agree with you. What do?
I would take every opportunity to make a public comment. When there's a proposed rule change, make a public comment. Contact your state administrator's office regularly with these kinds of issues. I know I'm rehashing the same thing, but this is how we change it.
Okay, here's another question, and we're getting close to our time frame here. Our driver got caught in crosswinds while driving and tilted to its side, almost flipped, but not completely. Yet there was damage to the truck and was towed. But when the officer made its report, it registered points to our SMS. No ticket was given to the driver. Can we challenge it? Truck damage by the.
I would like to review that by itself. If you've got my email, I'd like to talk to you about it. You can challenge it, but I'd want more information before I responded to that.
Yeah, I just put the email up here on the screen. A few more minutes. It says once the 2-year time frame expires and it falls off the carrier's MC, does the safety score go up?
Yes, or it improves. It should affect the inspection selection score and any other thing adjudicated within your SMS profile. And it will lower your, if it was an out of service violation, it should also lower your out of service rate.
Okay. Here's another question. Can an officer cite a company because of reefer temperature fluctuation when the bill of lading has a specific temperature?
Unless it's a hazardous material, I don't know of anything within the regulations that provides that kind of authority, and I would want to see the exact regulation that they cited. If they cited something like, for instance, there's a 396 violation that says that has to do with safe operation. If they use something that covers a bunch of area that isn't specific, I would definitely dispute that.
Okay, great. Here's another question. When an investigation is done, there's generally two parts. There's the report and also the notes from the officer. What do I do if I don't get the notes or a copy of them?
Generally speaking, if you're referring to a truck inspection, the notes, they're likely not going to provide them to you, or they'll be resistant to do so unless you file a FOIA request.
So you'd have to use a FOIA request in order to get those.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. Okay.
Because within the regulations, within 385, I have not seen anything that says that they have to provide those notes. I used to believe that they did have to. I looked it up, and the regulation that I was reviewing, I mean, ultimately, if you want them, you can get them, but you're going to have, unfortunately, they're going to make you follow that route.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Somebody asked, how do you request the notes? Is there, you've said a couple of times here about commenting. Where do they go to do that? Is that this, Richard?
So, yeah, so within a truck inspection, at the end of the inspection, within the electronic database that they use, which is called Aspen, there is a section for officer notes.
Okay.
And generally, unless the officer clicks the button that says print notes, you won't see them.
Okay. And where would a person go to make comments like we've talked about for the DataQ system? Is there a website?
What you want to do is go directly to the FMCSA website. And if you just Google FMCSA public comments,
okay,
it's going to bring up whatever current rulemaking they're discussing. And it will take you to an area where there'll be a hyperlink. You can click on that hyperlink. If you don't see any rules that are assigned to the issue you want to talk about, I would email the state administrator's office, and those email addresses are all right within the federal system. You can Google Minnesota DOT or Minnesota FMCSA state administrator's office, and you'll get the FMCSA administrator's email there.
Fantastic. I gotta tell you, Richard, there's a lot of good information, and I'm sure if we were on for another 2-3 hours, there'd be this many more questions.
Maybe we can go back and do it again.
Well, I think maybe what I may do is just set this up as a panel discussion and let people ask the experts about DataQ questions.
Yeah, I would actually like that rather than me rambling on.
Let people ask questions. That's great. So one thing I do want to mention, I think in a lot of cases, a lot of the things here we've talked about, Richard, you know, having some training available for your drivers on how to conduct and what to do when they are being inspected, or certainly at the scene of an accident, and training those people in your company that are responsible to do these DataQs to get as much knowledge as you possibly can. And having said that, a lot of you probably know that we provide a learning management system that could help you make that training possible. And I was just going to throw this out here. If any of you would like for us to provide you with a little demo of our service, we would be happy to do that and help you out. So, Richard, great information. Thank you so much. Sadly, we're running out of time here, but I really appreciate your input, and I am going to get back with you and see if we can put together a panel of people to have a really good discussion and get a lot of folks' questions answered.
Sounds good.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you all very much for joining us. We hope that you can join us again on our next webinar. By the way, I want you to write this one date down on November the 7th. And I believe it's at 2 p.m. and you all get invitations. We're going to have Rebecca Brewster from ATRI is going to present the top 10 industry issues, which were just recently presented at the ATA MC&E conference. So look for that invitation, and I hope that you can join us on the next webinar. Richard, thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody be safe out there. Thank you all for joining us.
Have a good day.
Thank you.